Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Now, this episode is for anyone leading a team with significant growth potential and a doubt about whether you're set up to achieve that potential. Now, you're looking at growth, so your product or your service is strong, your customers are happy, you're probably skilled in strategy and finance and sales and marketing. The opportunity in front of you, the opportunity to grow, is real and it's sizable and it's exciting. But there's something in your team that just feels not quite right. There's some reason that you're not confident that your team can keep pace with the rate that you know you can grow. Maybe you're stepping into details of work that you thought you delegated, or maybe a project is really dragging. Meetings might feel slower and less focused than they used to, feel like hard work. There's not much energy around. Maybe you're not hearing the questions and ideas that you expected from people who seemed full of promise when they joined. You might be feeling unsure about whether the next step is going to happen on time or happen at all unless you check on it. So if any of this sounds like the situation that you're in, you're hearing an alarm. It's not the kind that goes off at 6 a.m, but the kind that goes off quietly inside you as the leader of your success. You sense these kinds of alarms before you see them in your business outcomes. But instead of listening, most leaders hit snooze. And when the alarm goes off again, yep, snooze. So these culture alarms are all too easy to ignore. But in this episode, I want to encourage you to have the confidence to listen to your alarm, listen to your instincts. They're almost certainly right. You've used those instincts to build your strategy, to grow your business to the point where you need a team to keep on growing. You've used your instincts to make your customers happy. And there's no need to doubt your instincts now just because they're telling you something that's about culture, that's about the way that people connect, or more likely, if you're here, the way that people don't connect, instead of about conversion rates or revenue or profit. So acting now in the early stages of hearing that culture alarm is one of the smartest moves that you can make in enabling your business to outpace, outperform, and outlast your competition. It's a smart move that will enable your significant growth now, but also in the future. And your team culture is forming whether you're designing it or not. And if you're listening to this episode and you're noticing some of these signals, then your team is forming itself into a direction that isn't optimal for your growth. So the sooner you act when the signals are relatively small, the quicker and easier it will be to resolve the problems and put yourself on that path to maximizing your growth now and safeguarding it for all the uncertainty that you're going to be facing in the future. Now, a lot of people I work with describe what you're sensing in your team, the lower contributions, the lack of energy, and so on. They describe it as quiet discontent. It's often not dramatic, and that's what makes it so easy to ignore. It's easy to talk yourself out of paying attention to what you really know in your core is a growing problem. So you might tell yourself, I'm probably overreacting, or the team's just adjusting, or this is normal when you're growing. And all your friends and colleagues will likely tell you the same thing to reassure you. And perhaps especially if you're new in your role or you're leading a fast-growing business and have very little time for a new priority. But let me step away from business for a moment and share a personal story. When my son was about 2, I knew he wasn't developing in the typical way. It was very different from how his sister had developed through to this age. So he needed help, but I didn't know what for. For example, he was acting really unlike himself every evening after daycare. It was too much for him. And at daycare, he wasn't playing with the other children. In fact, he wasn't really playing at all. And he wasn't speaking. Everyone told me that I was overthinking, that I was worrying about nothing. You know, like your pregnancy was tough, so you're being clingy. Boys always develop more slowly than girls. Boys are really attached to their mothers. You're being oversensitive. Don't worry, give it time. I didn't want to be a mum who panicked over nothing. So I kept going and I tried to ignore my instincts and I tried not to second guess myself. But several months later, I had confirmation that I should have trusted my instincts. There was something real happening. He did need special support to learn to speak via training us as parents to approach it in a different way. He did need us to take a different perspective because he was diagnosed as autistic with learning difficulties. Now, that experience taught me something. Your instinct as a parent, as a leader, and those roles are not that different as someone who is responsible for others. Your instinct isn't noise, it's a signal. Now, with my son, all is not lost, definitely not. We started to learn and adjust later than we could have done, but the progress and the growth is there. Things are fine. But I always wonder where we would be, how much further we'd be if I had had the confidence to act on that signal. How much the delay in acting made things harder for him than they needed to be. So, back to your team. If something feels off, pay attention to it, because culture problems don't go away, no matter how many times you put that alarm on snooze. They deepen and they get more difficult and more expensive to address. Now, if you first thought this a year ago, that there was something not quite right, or two years ago, don't despair, all is not lost. You can always still address them. It's never game over, but it's easiest and quickest if you can do that early on. If you wait, you might experience something like the founder in this example. So founder of a multi-million-dollar scale-up who doubled revenue in 18 months, but ignored the culture alarm. And profit dropped from 32% to 18%. And the reason was that decision-making got slower, even though there were more meetings. So projects dragged on and the founder needed to get involved in everything. So they didn't have enough time to do their role. The hiring had been great. There were really, really strong people in the team, but it was a culture that hadn't been intentionally shaped. So as the team grew, everybody did what is probably natural for people working in a scale-up. They did what they thought was best individually, but that made things more complex. Trust fell and people disengaged. And that was the problem that eventually the founder could see in their financial metrics, but that they had actually sensed much sooner. So let's think about what this looks like. From the outside, everything looks fine, right? Millions, double the revenue, happy customers, growing. It's easy for people to tell you that you're being oversensitive, that it's a transition, and it's easy for you to persuade yourself to ignore it. But on the inside, you feel it. There's friction. As a leader, you might notice that tasks that you've delegated circle back to you, that you're chasing people to finish things that they should own. Maybe you feel you're having the same conversation multiple times. Maybe meetings are more frequent and longer and less decisive. So it's much more about activity than progress. And you just sense that the spark has gone. If you feel it, your team senses it too. Believe me, whether they're saying anything or not. It can feel to them like low or unproductive collaboration, like confusion about direction, fear of doing the wrong thing. It becomes a culture of just doing what's asked of you. Now, the word for team members who feel like this is disengaged. They've got low motivation. They don't feel a connection anymore to your mission. It often shows up as low morale, resistance to change, focusing on short-term delivery instead of long-term growth, and just declining curiosity and initiative and energy. And when you start to observe, though, and pay attention to symptoms of this sense that you have, you may notice things like siloed thinking and over-reliance on a few go-to people, cynical behavior, cynical humor, superficial talk, reluctance for people to speak up. Disengagement is, unfortunately, extremely common. And Gallup have run a very long-lasting study on employee engagement, and disengagement is steadily increasing. In 2004, 77% of employees globally were disengaged. Now, if you're lucky, they were quietly disengaged, just doing the minimum, like I've been describing. But they may also be so frustrated that they're actively disengaged, that they're vocal about it. And that's when their behavior brings others down with them. So as I said, disengagement is unfortunately extremely common. In Europe, it's 87% of employees who are disengaged. But what is very rare is a leader who invests the energy to do something about it and who reaps the rewards. And because this is rare, it's a source of immense competitive advantage in terms of attracting and retaining and engaging talent to do their best work for you, which of course emerges later on in your revenue and profit. Now, I understand that working on your team culture might feel vague and touchy-feely, but believe me, it's not. It's hard work. And there are best practices based on evidence, and you can measure changes in engagement very quickly. So a reason that people often don't feel confident focusing on team culture is because they don't have the metrics to back up what their senses are telling them. And that's often because those metrics are not being collected. So questions like, to what extent do you understand how your work contributes to the mission? To what extent do you feel a strong connection with the mission? How likely are you to share a dissenting opinion in your team or to share an idea? These kinds of questions would give you the data to back up your feeling. These are also generating leading metrics. So changes in these sentiments of employees happen in advance of changes in your revenue and profit, because your team is the foundational element of your business's success. Now, as well as negative cultural shift, as I've been talking about so far, you can drive signs of positive shift, and you can do that much more quickly than you might expect when you decide to focus on team culture, on team health. So let me share an example from a cultural program I led with a team working in a very toxic environment. So we ran a listening tour. It's just space for people to talk, to share. And one thing that makes a massive difference was for the leader of the team to replay to the team what they heard. And simply sharing back what was heard back to the department in a non-judgmental way without blame as a starting point on which to build a team-wide effort to make that team a wonderful place to work. Simply that led to a jump in engagement. We saw an increase of 20 points in Employee Net Promoter Score, ENPS, within 2 weeks. So it's incredibly quick. And of course, you can't see that in any productivity-related metrics yet, but the shift is real, and it does show up in your revenue and profit. It just shows up with a delay. Now, if you're not measuring ENPS and related metrics in an ongoing way, don't worry, because by observing, you can also notice early signs of change. And when you start to make an effort to shape your team culture, you might see colleagues offering help where they haven't been asked. You might see someone speaking up who's been quiet for weeks. Meetings might end with next steps instead of just updates. You might see real curiosity about the goal, not just task delivery. And you will see fun, laughter, actual enjoyment in participating in the team and in doing work, and not just sarcasm. In my Neuro-Inspired Teams program, an early action is for you to systematically make observations of these kinds of micro signals, because they really do matter. They're motivating to help you and your team to stay on track, to redesign your culture, and they're the closest that you'll get to real-time responses way in advance of your downstream metrics. So heading towards the close of this episode, what I want to emphasize is that building a high-performing, engaging culture isn't guesswork or fantasy. It's not touchy-feely. There's real evidence behind what works, and there are best practices. It's a strategic choice that you can make and invest in and measure, just like you can any other strategic priority that you're considering. So if you want to outpace, outperform, and outlast your competition, please listen to your culture alarm. Don't keep hitting snooze. It's one of the smartest investments you'll ever make in your growth now and in the future. Now, if you're still here listening, you've already made a great start by listening to this podcast. You've taken your first step, and that's an investment in your growth. And now I want to encourage you to keep listening to that alarm and take another step. Learn a bit more. Listen to more of my podcast episodes. Let me make some recommendations. I suggest episode 12 about the culture that best supports scale-ups. Episode 29, which contrasts the outcomes of IBM and Polaroid, who took different approaches to their culture. or episode 27, which is a discussion between me and organisational psychologist Robert Annis about teams of the future. You could also have a look at my blog, Inside View. And if you'd like to stay in the loop with what I'm doing and the places that I open on my programs, sign up for my newsletter, or just reach out whether you're ready to act or just want to talk it through. Thanks for listening.